Welcome, everyone. Today we are going to keep the entire historical debate around George Orwell's famous book right at our fingertips. This explainer is going to be a very fascinating journey because, basically, we are looking directly at how the world reacted when Animal Farm first hit the shelves. It was a time when questioning your political allies was a very dangerous game, isn't it? Let us get started.
Just look at how quickly the conversation evolved. Over just a year and a half, starting from August 1945, right after the Second World War wrapped up, diverse voices jumped in to review the work. The critics, from Graham Greene to Northrop Frye, took up their pens almost immediately. They were scrambling to make sense of this explosive little book, each bringing their own heavy literary and political baggage to the table.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We have 1. Revisiting Orwell's Animal Farm. 2. A literary fairy story. 3. The political backlash. 4. The failure of imagination. And 5. A polarizing legacy. We will be doing the needful to break down this complex collection of critical essays into clear, thematic pieces for you.
Section 1. Revisiting Orwell's Animal Farm. Okay, let us dive into this and set the stage for why this little book caused such a massive stir across the literary world.
When Orwell published this satirical animal fable about the Russian Revolution, he stepped directly into a very heated historical battleground. The Second World War just finished, the Soviet Union was a major ally to the West, and suddenly, here comes a short story comparing that very ally to a farm run by tyrannical pigs. The British government was highly sensitive about upsetting Joseph Stalin, their powerful ally who had just helped defeat Germany. So obviously, everyone had a very strong opinion on Orwell's daring move.
Moving to Section 2, a literary fairy story. First up, we will be discussing the immense literary praise from critics who absolutely loved its simple, powerful storytelling.
Edmund Wilson, a prominent American critic, thought it was brilliant, actually. Even though he didn't usually like modern animal fables, he compared Orwell's plain and spare prose to the absolute greatness of Voltaire and Swift. He loved the simplicity and the dry wit of the narrative, praising how Orwell used such a clean, unpretentious style to deliver a devastatingly sharp satire. It wasn't bloated, it was perfectly executed.
Over in the UK, Graham Greene highly praised it too. He wrote that there has never been such a thing as a literature of appeasement. He called it a sad fable that accurately expresses a personal vision without bowing down to political pressure. He really admired Orwell for refusing to stay quiet just to please political allies. For Greene, this bravery was the hallmark of true literature only.
Now, let us demystify some of these heavier words Greene used in his review to keep the meaning simple for us. Appeasement, basically, is when you compromise your principles just to avoid a fight, and a cenotaph is a monument to the dead. Greene brilliantly uses these words to describe the British Ministry of Information as a huge cenotaph of appeasement, because an official there initially rejected Orwell's manuscript, nervously asking if the dictator really had to be a pig. Greene saw the publication of the book as a major victory over that kind of intellectual cowardice.
Section 3. The political backlash. But the praise wasn't universal, was it? Let's move to the fierce political pushback, coming from critics on the left who felt deeply betrayed.
Critic Cyril Connolly clearly maps out the allegory for us here, showing exactly who each animal represents in the Soviet experiment. Napoleon is Stalin, Snowball is Leon Trotsky, and the hard-working tragic horses Boxer and Clover represent the working class or the proletariat. Because these historical parallels were so incredibly obvious, critics couldn't just evaluate the book as a harmless fairy tale. They had to evaluate Orwell's version of history and whether it was actually fair to the Russian people.
Notice the stark contrast in these receptions. While the literary view saw a beautifully written, perfectly proportioned fable, the political view saw a historically false and neglectful attack on complex reality. Critics, like Kingsley Martin, felt it completely misrepresented the complex truth about the USSR. Martin felt Orwell was neglecting the massive, real-world challenges the Soviets actually faced in trying to build a new society from scratch while surrounded by hostile nations.
Martin writes that Orwell is reaching the exhaustion of idealism and approaching the bathos of cynicism. He forcefully argues that by making Stalin the ultimate evil, Orwell was just lashing out in frustration at mankind. Martin felt Orwell had lost his faith in humanity entirely, and that the book was ultimately a very cynical, unhelpful exercise that offered absolutely no solutions to the problems of the modern world.
Let me just quickly explain what this word bathos means, since Martin uses it so sharply.
Bathos is an abrupt transition from something highly ideal or lofty down to something ridiculous or disappointing, like an anticlimax. Martin is simply saying Orwell's high socialist ideals have crashed down into a very negative, unhelpful cynicism. He thought Orwell started with noble dreams, but ended up just wallowing in the mud with the pigs he was writing about.
Let us move forward to Section 4, the failure of imagination. As we are moving into 1946, the critiques become deeply philosophical, questioning the very format of the fable itself.
Isaac Rosenfeld puts forward the view that the book is a disappointing piece of work. He argues that it stays entirely on the imaginative surface. For Rosenfeld, if the most piggish pig simply wins because he is the most unscrupulous and greedy, it doesn't really teach us anything new about human nature or totalitarianism. He calls it a failure of imagination, because it doesn't explain why the bad guys are attractive to people in the first place, or how they actually seize the minds of the masses to maintain power.
In his review, Rosenfeld creatively refers to Lenin, who is mostly lingering in the background of Orwell's story, as a Dybbuk. Let me explain this word for you. It is Yiddish, and it just means a wandering evil spirit or demon in folklore that possesses the living. Rosenfeld uses this specific term to show how Orwell simplified very complex, deeply influential historical figures into mere ghosts haunting a barnyard, failing to really grapple with their actual ideological weight.
Now, this brilliantly illustrates Northrop Frye's argument. He claims Orwell missed the whole point of the Russian development of Marxism. Orwell wrote a story about high ideals being corrupted by practical greed, the corruption of principle by expediency. But Frye says the reality of Marxism was the exact opposite, the corruption of expediency by principle. Meaning, the Soviet leaders took ruthless practical actions just to survive their immediate crises, and then they twisted their lofty principles to justify those terrible actions. Orwell, according to Frye, had the formula completely backward.
To explain this further, Frye mentions a priori generalizations. A priori is just a scholarly way of saying theories made up in your head before looking at the actual facts on the ground. Frye argues Marxism tried to be scientific and grounded in facts, not a priori utopian dreams. Therefore, he felt Orwell's fable fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of the enemy it was attacking, mistaking a harsh, mechanical system for a simple moral failure.
Finally, Section 5, a polarizing legacy. So, wrapping up our explainer today, we people can clearly see how a simple text got caught directly in the crossfire of ideological history.
Reviewing Martin's detailed, heavily text-based critique here, we can see just how incredibly heated the debate was. Now, as your host, I'm impartially reporting this. We are not picking a side between the left-wing critics like Martin and Rosenfeld or defenders like Wilson and Green. Rather, it is fascinating to see that both sides felt very strongly, and both sides used Orwell's text as a mirror for their own worldview. The book became a sort of psychological test for where you stood in the post-war world, isn't it?
So, the crucial point we must ask ourselves after looking at all this history is about this massive clash between literary brilliance and political accuracy. The book is undeniably a literary masterpiece of simple prose, but does it perfectly capture the USSR, or is it an unfair, oversimplified attack on a highly complex reality?
I will leave you with this final provocative thought. Does a simple story need to be perfectly true to complex history to teach us a valuable lesson about power? Does the pig have to be perfectly historically accurate, or is the warning about greed and tyranny enough? Now you have this entire historical debate right at your fingertips. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what you read.